My name is Julia, and I'm 32 years old. I've always been a healthy person, or so I thought. It was a typical Monday morning when my world turned upside down. I woke up feeling fine, but as the day went on, I started experiencing severe abdominal pain. At first, I brushed it off as something I ate, but as the pain intensified, I knew I had to see a doctor. I made an appointment with Dr. Jones, a reputable physician in our community. I had been to see him before for minor issues, and I trusted his judgment. As I sat in his office, I explained my symptoms, and he listened attentively. After a brief examination, he told me I had a minor issue that would pass with some medication. I left his office feeling relieved, but the pain persisted. Over the next few weeks, I visited Dr. Jones multiple times, and each time he reassured me that everything was fine. But I knew something was wrong. The pain was getting worse, and I was starting to feel weak. I couldn't shake off the feeling that Dr. Jones was missing something. One day, I decided to get a second opinion. I made an appointment with Dr. Kennedy, a specialist in internal medicine. As I sat in her office, I recounted my experiences with Dr. Jones. She listened intently, her expression growing more concerned by the minute. After a thorough examination, she ordered some tests, and I left her office feeling hopeful that I would finally get some answers. Little did I know, my journey was just beginning, and it would lead me down a path of discovery, betrayal, and ultimately, justice. The next few days would change my life forever, and I would never look at the medical profession the same way again. As I waited for the test results, I couldn't help but think about my family and friends. My best friend, Brenda, had been supporting me throughout this ordeal, and I was grateful for her presence in my life. My brother, Jamal, had been urging me to seek a second opinion, and I was glad I had taken his advice. But despite their support, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was in for a rude awakening. The days passed slowly, and I anxiously awaited the test results. When Dr. Kennedy called me to discuss the results, I knew that my life was about to take a dramatic turn. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. And then, I heard the words that would change everything. I sat in Dr. Jones's office, trying to explain what was happening to my body. "Doc, I've been experiencing severe abdominal pain, and it's getting worse," I said, wincing slightly as I shifted in my seat. Dr. Jones listened attentively, his expression neutral, as he asked follow-up questions. "Can you tell me more about the pain? When did it start? And have you noticed any triggers?" he asked, his pen poised over his notebook. I thought back to the first day I felt the pain, trying to pinpoint exactly when it started. "It began a few weeks ago, and at first, I thought it was just something I ate. But the pain hasn't gone away, and it's getting more intense," I replied, trying to provide as much detail as possible. Dr. Jones nodded thoughtfully and began to examine me. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Jones finally spoke up. "I think you're okay, Julia. I'm going to prescribe you some medication for the pain, and I want you to come back in a week if it doesn't improve." I left his office feeling somewhat relieved but still uncertain. The pain persisted, and I found myself returning to Dr. Jones's office multiple times, each time hoping he would find something concrete. But each visit ended with the same reassurance. "You're fine, Julia." I began to feel frustrated and scared. Why couldn't he find anything? One day, I decided I'd had enough. I made an appointment with Dr. Kennedy, a specialist in internal medicine. As I sat in her office, recounting my experiences with Dr. Jones, I felt a mix of desperation and hope. Dr. Kennedy listened intently, her expression growing increasingly concerned. After a thorough examination, she ordered some tests and told me to come back in a few days for the results. I left her office feeling hopeful that I would finally get some answers. The days passed slowly as I anxiously awaited the test results. When Dr. Kennedy called me to discuss the results, I knew my life was about to take a dramatic turn. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Julia, "We need to talk about your test results," she said, her voice measured. My heart sank, and I braced myself for the worst. "Julia, I'm going to be straightforward with you. Your test results show some abnormalities that we need to investigate further," Dr. Kennedy explained, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I processed what she was telling me. "What does that mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dr. Kennedy hesitated before responding. "We'll need to run some more tests, but it's possible that you have a condition that we haven't caught yet." Her words left me reeling, and I knew that my journey to discover what was happening to my body was far from over. As I left Dr. Kennedy's office, my mind was racing with questions. What was wrong with me? Why hadn't Dr. Jones caught it? What would happen next? I knew I had to push forward, to find out what was going on, and get the help I needed. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a long and complex journey. I called my best friend Brenda to pick me up from the doctor's office. As we drove home, I filled her in on what Dr. Kennedy had said. Brenda listened attentively, offering words of encouragement and support. Her presence was a comfort, and I knew I could rely on her no matter what. When we got to my apartment, Jamal was waiting for me. He'd been keeping an eye on me throughout this ordeal, and I appreciated his concern. "Hey sis, how'd it go?" he asked, his eyes scanning my face for any sign of what was happening. I filled him in on the details, and he listened intently, his expression growing increasingly worried. As we talked, Norman, a neighbor, stopped by to see how I was doing. His visit was a brief respite from the anxiety that had been building up inside me. But as soon as he left, my mind turned back to the diagnosis and what it might mean for my future. The rest of the day passed in a blur as I tried to process everything. I knew I had to stay positive and focus on getting better, but it was hard not to let fear take over. As the sun began to set, I realized that I had a long road ahead of me, but I was determined to face it head-on. I sat in Dr. Kennedy's office, going over the test results. "Dr. Kennedy, what's going on? Why didn't Dr. Jones catch this?" I asked, trying to understand. Dr. Kennedy leaned forward, her expression serious. "Julia, sometimes these things can be complex. Dr. Jones may have missed it, or maybe we just need to look at the bigger picture," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. I nodded, taking it all in. "What do we do next?" I asked, determination rising within me. Dr. Kennedy smiled. "We'll run some more tests, and I'll refer you to a specialist who can help us figure out what's going on." I left her office feeling like I was finally getting somewhere. The next few days were a blur of tests and appointments. I met with Dr. Norman, a specialist who seemed to know exactly what he was doing. "Julia, we're going to get to the bottom of this," he said, his confidence reassuring. As the test results came back, Dr. Norman sat me down to discuss the findings. "Julia, it looks like you have a condition that requires immediate attention. We're going to need to start treatment right away," he said, his words firm but gentle. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, knowing that I finally had a diagnosis. But with relief came a new set of questions. What would treatment entail? Would I be okay? I asked Dr. Norman about my options, and he explained the different paths we could take. I listened intently, determined to make the best decisions for my health. As I left the hospital, I couldn't help but think about Dr. Jones. How could he have missed this? I felt a sense of frustration and anger, but I knew I had to focus on my health right now. I called Jamal and Brenda to fill them in on the latest developments. They listened attentively, offering words of encouragement and support. Their presence in my life was a comfort, and I knew I could rely on them no matter what. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but I was determined to face it head-on. I knew I had a good medical team behind me, and I was ready to fight for my health. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I was ready to take control of my life and my health. and I knew that I would get through this. I sat in my living room, surrounded by papers and files, determined to get to the bottom of what had happened. I had been researching my condition and the possible causes, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Jones had made a grave mistake. I started making phone calls, trying to gather more information about my medical history and the treatment I had received from Dr. Jones. I spoke with the hospital's medical records department, and they told me that I would need to submit a formal request for my records. I filled out the paperwork and submitted it, anxiously waiting for the records to arrive. When they finally came, I pored over them, looking for any clues that might explain what had happened. I noticed that Dr. Jones had ordered some tests, but the results hadn't been followed up on. I decided to dig deeper, and I started researching Dr. Jones's background. I looked up his credentials and read reviews from other patients. What I found shocked me. There were several complaints about Dr. Jones's carelessness and lack of attention to detail. I felt a sense of validation, knowing that I wasn't just being paranoid. I decided to take my findings to Dr. Kennedy, hoping that she could help me make sense of it all. I made an appointment with her and arrived at her office, determined to get some answers. Dr. Kennedy, I've been doing some research, and I think Dr. Jones may have made a serious mistake, I said, laying out my evidence. Dr. Kennedy listened attentively, her expression growing increasingly concerned. Julia, I think you have a valid concern, she said. I'd like to investigate further and see if we can determine what went wrong. I left her office feeling hopeful that justice would be served. The investigation was just beginning, and I was determined to see it through. I met with Dr. Kennedy several times, discussing the findings and the next steps. We pored over the medical records, looking for any signs of negligence. As the investigation continued, I couldn't help but think about the impact that Dr. Jones's mistake had had on my life. I had lost trust in the medical system, and I was determined to make sure that no one else would have to go through what I had. Dr. Kennedy and I worked together to gather evidence and build a case against Dr. Jones. We spoke with other patients who had similar experiences, and we documented everything. The evidence was mounting, and I knew that Dr. Jones would have to face the consequences of his actions. The investigation was a long and arduous process, but I was determined to see it through. I was fighting for justice, and I wouldn't give up until I got it. I knew that it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for whatever came next. I stood outside Dr. Jones's office, my heart pounding in my chest. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks, gathering evidence and building a case against him. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Dr. Jones looked up from his desk, a hint of surprise on his face. Julia, what brings you here? He asked, his voice neutral. I walked into the office, my eyes locked on his. Dr. Jones, I'm here to talk to you about your handling of my case, I said, my voice firm. I've done some research, and I believe you made a grave mistake that nearly cost me my life. Dr. Jones's expression changed, and he leaned back in his chair. Julia, I understand that you're upset, but I'm not sure what you're talking about, he said, his voice calm. I pulled out a stack of papers from my bag and handed them to him. These are my medical records, and they show that you missed a critical diagnosis, I said, my voice rising. You prescribed me medication that didn't address the underlying condition, and it nearly killed me. Dr. Jones looked at the papers, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable. Julia, I don't know what to say, he stuttered. I leaned forward, my eyes blazing. You should have been more careful, Dr. Jones. You should have listened to me when I told you about my symptoms. You should have run more tests, I said, my voice firm. Dr. Jones looked up at me, a hint of guilt in his eyes. Julia, I'm sorry. I truly am. But I'm not sure what I could have done differently, he said, his voice soft. I shook my head, disgust rising up in me. You could have paid attention to my symptoms. You could have listened to me when I told you about my pain. You could have taken my concerns seriously, I said, my voice firm. Dr. Jones looked down, his eyes avoiding mine. I understand that I made a mistake, Julia, and I'm truly sorry for it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I stood up, my eyes locked on his. Sorry isn't enough, Dr. Jones. You need to take responsibility for your actions. You need to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else, I said, my voice firm. Dr. Jones looked up at me, a hint of understanding in his eyes. You're right, Julia. I'll do what I can to make it right, he said, his voice firm. I nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction. I'll be watching, Dr. Jones, and if I don't see any changes, I'll make sure that everyone knows about your mistakes, I said, my voice firm. Dr. Jones nodded, his eyes locked on mine. I understand, Julia, and I appreciate your willingness to hold me accountable, he said, his voice soft. I turned and walked out of the office, feeling a sense of closure. As I walked out of the office building, I felt a sense of determination. I had confronted Dr. Jones, and I had made my point. But I knew that this was just the beginning. I would continue to fight for justice, and I would make sure that Dr. Jones was held accountable for his actions. I pulled out my phone and dialed Dr. Kennedy's number. Dr. Kennedy, it's Julia. I just confronted Dr. Jones, and I think it's time we take this to the next level, I said, my voice firm. Dr. Kennedy's voice was calm and reassuring. Julia, I'm proud of you. Let's discuss the next steps and see what we can do to hold Dr. Jones accountable, she said. I smiled, feeling a sense of hope. I'd like that, Dr. Kennedy. Let's make sure that Dr. Jones pays for what he's done, I said, my voice firm. Dr. Kennedy's voice was firm. We will, Julia. We'll do everything we can to make sure that justice is served, she said. I nodded, feeling a sense of determination. Let's do it, I said, my voice firm. And with that, the battle for justice began. I sat in my living room, surrounded by the familiar comforts of home. The sun had set hours ago, casting a warm orange glow over the room. My mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the past few months. I thought about the day I first visited Dr. Jones, full of hope and trust. I thought about the misdiagnosis, the wrong treatment, and the devastating consequences. As I reflected on what had happened, I couldn't help but wonder what I could have done differently. Should I have sought a second opinion sooner? Should I have been more assertive with Dr. Jones? The questions swirled in my head, but I knew I had done the best I could with the information I had at the time. I thought about Dr. Jones and his apology. It had seemed sincere, but words were cheap. Actions spoke louder, and I wanted to see real change. I wanted to make sure that no one else would have to go through what I had endured. As I sat there, lost in thought, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could let the experience define me, or I could use it as an opportunity for growth. I could let the anger and frustration consume me, or I could channel it into something positive. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the night sky. The stars were shining brightly, and the world seemed vast and full of possibilities. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of determination rising up within me. I knew that I would fight for justice, not just for myself, but for others who had been wronged. I would make sure that Dr. Jones was held accountable for his actions, and that he would never again put someone's life at risk. As I stood there, looking out at the world, I felt a sense of purpose. I knew that I would face challenges and obstacles along the way, but I was ready. I was ready to take on the system, to fight for what was right, and to make a difference. I turned away from the window and walked over to my desk. I sat down, opened my laptop, and began to type. I was writing a letter to the medical board, detailing my experience with Dr. Jones and demanding action. It was the first step in a long journey, but I was ready to take it. As I typed, the words flowed effortlessly onto the page. I was driven by a sense of purpose, a sense of justice. I knew that this was just the beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. I would fight for the truth, and I would fight for justice. And I would not rest until I had achieved my goal. If you're watching this video, you're probably here because you or someone you know has been affected by medical malpractice. My name is Julia, and I'm here to share my story with you. A few months ago, I was misdiagnosed by my doctor, Dr. Jones. He prescribed me medication that didn't address my underlying condition, and it nearly cost me my life. After doing some research and gathering evidence, I confronted Dr. Jones about his mistake. He apologized, but I knew that wasn't enough. I wanted to make sure that no one else would have to go through what I had endured. So, I took my case to the medical board and demanded action. But I didn't stop there. I realized that medical malpractice is a bigger problem than I had initially thought. There are countless cases of doctors making mistakes and patients suffering the consequences. That's why I'm calling on all of you to join me in demanding change. We need to hold doctors and hospitals accountable for their actions. We need to make sure that patients are protected and that their voices are heard. And we need to do it now. I'm not asking you to just watch this video and forget about it. I'm asking you to take action. If you or someone you know has been affected by medical malpractice, I want to hear from you. Share your story with me, and let's work together to create change. We can make a difference, but we need to act now. You can start by commenting below with your story or sharing this video with someone who needs to see it. Let's make some noise and demand justice for patients everywhere. I'm not going to let this issue fade away, and I hope you'll join me in this fight. Together, we can create a safer and more just healthcare system for everyone. Let's get started. Share this video, comment below, and let's make our voices heard. We owe it to ourselves, our loved ones, and our communities to take action. I'll continue to share my story and fight for change. And I hope you'll join me every step of the way. Let's do this. Let's make a difference. Let's demand justice for patients everywhere. Thank you for watching.